Hello, hello, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. My name is Simon Powers, and this is Classical Guitar Corner. In the previous Fireside Chats, I have played you a study that I've written each time, and this time I'm going to play you study number 12. We did 13, number 8, and now number 12. This is one on staccato technique, which I'll talk a little bit about, the challenge of teaching staccato technique. And then the main topic of today will be dealing with a question that came up in the forum on when is it time to move on from a piece of repertoire that you're playing, to move on from an exercise that you're working on. What should you be looking out for? But here is study number 12. Let me know what you think. A little staccato study then. Of course, waltz style often has a little light articulation on the second and maybe the third beat. Excuse my out of tune guitar. I just put new strings on for a concert I'm doing this Friday. Timing the change of strings has to be just right, so it's sort of, they're fresh and sparkling, but they're also in tune, and so I've got a few more days for them to settle. But staccato technique's an interesting one, and when I was redesigning the grade 2 curriculum, I discovered it really breaks down into multiple different types. We've got right hand staccato, where the right hand comes back down to the strings and stops that sound, and that was evident here. It's probably the most straightforward type of staccato. But then there's left hand staccato, where we lift the left hand finger and dampen the string and stop it sounding by that lifting. I often think of it like button pressing. There's also damping with the left hand, and then there's a synchronization of both the left and the right hand. So it's one of those things that if you think too much about it, it will drive you crazy, stir crazy. But over time, it becomes very intuitive. I often use the analogy of walking. If you really thought about every single mechanical movement in your body, when you walk, left, right, ankle, knee, hip, weight forward, that would also be overwhelming. And so too goes some techniques. Bass stopping is another one where you have to try and choreograph your thumb hopping around to stop the bass notes ringing. At first, it's very overwhelming, but with time, it becomes second nature and habitual. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that study number 12. Over the course of these fireside chats, I think I'll probably get through all of them. The question for today came in from Michelle in the forum, and this is a question that comes up a lot. I did address the question in the orientation course, but it's worth talking about again because it's so common. The question is, when you're going through the curriculum at CGC, when do you know if it's time to move on to the next lesson or indeed the next unit or the next grade? And this question pertains to anything that you might be working on. It may not just be within the curriculum itself. It might also be with a piece you're working on or exercises that you have been designated for a while. Ultimately, and you may not like this answer, ultimately it's a balancing act between your own intuition and common sense, and also experience and just being able to sense when it is time to move on. That's a very wishy-washy answer. Let me break it down into something a bit more solid. There are different goals when we're learning repertoire or doing exercises. For instance, when you're playing or learning a piece of repertoire, you might have a goal to perform that repertoire. You might have an open mic you're working towards, or maybe you want to make a recording for yourself or for YouTube. That goal will then give you some guidance about when to move on. Have you been able to play it from beginning to end? Can you play it with musical shaping, phrasing, articulation? Can you play it from memory if that's a goal of yours? All of those things will be great markers for you to decide whether it's time to move on from a piece of music or not. However, and this is where the wishy-washiness comes in, when it comes to learning repertoire, I would say as a generalization, most students tend to move on too quickly. They might get to a point where they can play it from beginning to end and sort of tick the box of correct rhythms and correct pitches. But there's a real depth to be explored by staying with a piece after you've reached that point, by performing it, recording it, and getting a bit of a feedback loop going. So you perhaps get some feedback from a teacher or a mentor, from people in the open mic audience, or from yourself, your own self-analysis of your own status recordings for your, on your phone or what have you. Staying with it, and as an approximation, we're talking weeks or a month or two even, longer than you might normally do, will often reveal and give you value, I suppose. It will give you educational value more than you might expect. You can focus on things like polish, sound quality, your intention with the phrasing and the shaping. Are you really getting that as much expression as out of the pieces you would like, or you potentially could, if you're just going from beginning to end? So that kind of thing is a really valuable way to spend your time with repertoire. Obviously, you have to kind of love the piece. Sometimes if a piece has been assigned to you or it's part of the curriculum and you're not absolutely in love with it musically, it can be a bit of a drag to stay with it for that long. But in general, see if you can get to the point where you tick those boxes of I can play it from beginning to end with accuracy, with some musicality, and then stay with it and maybe have some goals of performance, recording, and then moving on. On the other end of the spectrum, it is important to say that you will get diminishing returns at a certain point. After you've spent the time getting the piece to 80-90% polished, after that, there's this sort of impossible length of time, impossible to gauge length of time, that you might strive for perfection. But of course, if you've been playing guitar long enough, you'll know that perfection is not an end point. It's also not really achievable, except perhaps through a lot of editing. So make sure you don't put an unrealistic expectation on yourself. You see what I mean about this balancing act? So, but in general, I still stand by the idea that most people will benefit from staying with pieces a little bit longer. Now, when it comes to exercises, they really are a means to an end. So if you're working on slurs, and you might be working on the rhythm of the slurs, it's gone from that kind of lopsided rhythm to then you've reached the goal of your technical work for now, and then you can move on. But here's the wishy-washy bit, is you can also come back to technique, and you'll probably find different challenges and different insights as you progress as a player, because of course slurs are going to permeate your repertoire for the rest of your life. And so it's worth first of all getting the rhythm in control, and the second note, the slurred note, nice and clear. But then moving on from that, maybe you start to think, oh well, I want to be able to control the release of the second note so that it might be softer or hyper-articulated. Both of those will have their musical settings where it becomes appropriate. Here's one with a soft release, a resolution of a suspension. Or maybe you want a really articulated slur because it's helping you play a fast scale. In that case, a really nice, bright, clear second note would be appropriate. So you can see how that simple example illustrates that techniques will evolve over time, and you'll be revisiting those techniques with a different focus in mind each time. So the curriculum inside the Academy is progressive. We've got lessons, units, and grades. And I would say if you're working within a unit, it's really worth your while to move around from those lessons and revisit them as you progress through. So don't be afraid to, you don't have to always go step by step by step. In general, we move in that direction because it's progressive curriculum. But of course, you can go back a few lessons, revisit one. You might have some more insight having left it for a week or two and coming back to that lesson, back to a piece of music, back to an exercise, back to a concept. I found in my own studies over the years that things take a while to sink in. One very vivid example for me is that of music theory. I remember in my undergraduate years studying music theory. Actually, even in high school, I had a really great tutor who taught me music theory, and certain things made sense, of course. You pick up bits along the way, but only really when I was in my mid-20s, I was at graduate school, did theory start to make sense in a practical musical way, in that it would impact the way I would play a piece of music, how I would understand a piece. I really loved the practical application of music theory. I was never into it in a analytical, kind of cerebral way, but I did enjoy how it helped my understanding of the music that I was playing. And that's how I often try and teach it. We talk about arts and crafts time. We just did that in a seminar today on practice. And phrasing is an incredible tool in terms of our analysis, and cadences can be informative, but nitty-gritty Schenkerian analysis or Roman numeral analysis, if you know what those mean, it might be a little bit interesting sometimes, but perhaps a bit divorced from impacting our interpretation of the music. So, all of that said, you can always reach out to myself or Dave or one of the other teachers on the coaching calls and ask their opinion of when you're ready to move on. I know in the case of Michelle in the forum, she did say she had feedback talking about issues she had in the right hand. This goes back to then the idea of balancing out your work on your fundamentals. So as you're progressing through, if someone points out that you need some work on fundamentals with right hand technique or left hand technique, something really essential to what you're doing, perhaps then it's time to press pause in terms of your progression. And not only do you not move forward, you actually go and relook at the fundamentals. Now, I've said this to people over the years, and sometimes it's taken perhaps in the wrong way. I don't mean, oh, you're suddenly, I'm demoting you as a player. What it really means is that the fundamentals are so impactful to everything we do. Even the most complex repertoire that we could think of is going to be impacted by your fundamental right-hand position, left-hand position, sitting position, tone and the movement of your hands, your nail shape, all of those elements are going to come into play all the time. And so it's really okay to go back, to press pause, go back, revisit the fundamentals with overwhelmingly simple exercises like open strings to retrain or consolidate your technique to get the right sound that you're looking for, consistency that you might be looking for. So sometimes it's good to press pause. And Michelle, if you have someone saying right hand work, right hand issues, I would highly suggest dealing with that, and only when you feel confident that that's been dealt with, then sort of re-entering into the flow. Because if you don't, then you risk further establishing the mistakes or the bad habits, shall we say, and they're harder to get rid of the longer you stay with them and the more repertoire you imbue with that technique. It's far better to press pause, address the issue, and then continue on, in my opinion. But as it says in the Delphic Oracle, you have to know yourself and you have to know how you work, what brings you joy, and ultimately these decisions are up to you. So while the curriculum is designed in a particular way, you have to also make decisions based on what brings you joy, what you know about your own learning style, and let's all hope that we progress forward, enjoy the process, and play some beautiful music. What should I do? Maybe I should just play one more study before we leave. Well, you know what? I did want to ask out there, we've just this morning had a practice seminar. We're doing practice challenge for the whole month of May. And I wanted to ask anyone, perhaps out on YouTube or even in the academy, if you wanted to offer up how you structure your practice sessions. So maybe it's a planning, warm-up, stretching, technique, repertoire. With the repertoire, you working on stuff that you are learning now, or you keeping repertoire alive that you've learned before, maintaining that repertoire. How do you divvy up your time? I think it'd be really interesting for people to hear of the way you use your time. And while you're thinking about that, I'll play you one more study. This is study number 9. On left-hand independence. So watch my second finger as it goes across to that G and back to the D as an example at the beginning. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time.